It was a cool autumn evening when Mark dropped the bombshell that would forever alter the course of our lives. We were sitting in our familiar, comforting living room, the soft glow of lamplight casting warm shadows across the walls. I was nestled into our favorite armchair, cradling a cup of chamomile tea, and Mark sat across from me on the couch. The atmosphere was peaceful, and I felt content, the stresses of the day momentarily forgotten. Little did I know that my world was about to be shattered into a million pieces. Mark's expression was troubled, his brows furrowed as he fiddled with the edge of his tea saucer. He cleared his throat, and the tension in the room grew palpable. I watched him closely, sensing that something grave was about to be revealed. "Honey," he began, his voice quivering with unease, "I've done something that I need to tell you about." A chill ran down my spine, and my heart raced as I set my teacup down on the side table. I looked at him, a sense of foreboding settling over me. "What is it, Mark? You're scaring me." He took a deep breath, his eyes avoiding mine, and confessed, "I've given your $220,000 savings to my mother." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. My hard-earned savings, the product of years of diligence and sacrifice, had been handed over to my mother-in-law without my knowledge or consent. My initial shock quickly gave way to a tidal wave of emotions, a torrent of anger and betrayal that surged through me. "Why, Mark?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and anger. "How could you do this without even discussing it with me?" Mark's justification was even more shocking and disturbing. "She threatened to expose some of our secrets from the past," he admitted, his eyes finally meeting mine. "She said she'd destroy our marriage if I didn't comply." I sat there, stunned and heartbroken, as the reality of Mark's actions sunk in. Our once solid foundation had been shaken to its core, and the ominous threat of divorce now loomed over our relationship. Little did I know that this revelation was only the beginning of a harrowing journey into betrayal, despair, and uncertainty. In the aftermath of Mark's shocking confession, my world felt like it had been turned upside down. The gravity of his actions weighed heavily on me, and I couldn't shake the profound sense of betrayal that coursed through my veins. The days that followed were marked by an agonizing mix of emotions. I vacillated between anger, confusion, and heartache, struggling to come to terms with the enormity of what had happened. Mark, too, seemed to be grappling with the consequences of his actions, his guilt palpable in every interaction. We had countless heated arguments where accusations and recriminations flew like arrows between us. I demanded answers, seeking to understand why Mark had chosen to give away our savings without consulting me, without even considering the impact on our future. Mark's explanations, while they provided some insight, only deepened the pain. He spoke of the threats his mother had made, threats that extended far beyond the financial realm. She had wielded secrets from our past like a weapon, threatening to expose them and tear our marriage apart. I felt trapped, caught between my love for Mark and the profound betrayal of trust. The knowledge that Mark had acted under duress, driven by fear of his mother's vindictiveness, left me torn. But it also left me with a nagging question. Did he truly have no choice? Could he have handled the situation differently? As the days turned into weeks, I found myself haunted by these questions, grappling with the complex emotions that came with the revelation. The fear of divorce, once a distant possibility, now loomed ominously on the horizon, casting a long and foreboding shadow over our once happy marriage. Despite the tumultuous nature of our relationship at that moment, there was still a flicker of hope within me, a hope that we could somehow navigate this treacherous path together, that we could find a way to mend the broken trust and salvage our love. Little did I know that our journey had only just begun, and the road ahead would be filled with even more heartache, betrayal, and unexpected twists. In the wake of Mark's betrayal and the painful realization that my hard-earned savings had been handed over to his mother, I found myself in a state of emotional turmoil. The once solid foundation of our marriage felt fragile and cracked, and I knew that we had to confront this crisis head on. I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't eat. My thoughts constantly revolved around the shocking turn of events. The fear of divorce, which had been used as a weapon to coerce Mark into surrendering the money, hung over us like a dark cloud. It was a cloud I desperately wanted to dispel. One evening, I decided that we needed to have a serious conversation, one that would determine the course of our future. I sat Mark down, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "We need to find a way out of this mess. Together," I began. "This can't be our future." Mark's eyes were filled with remorse as he met my gaze, and he nodded slowly. He understood the gravity of the situation and the damage his actions had caused. He assured me that he would talk to his mother, that he would do whatever it took to rectify the situation. We spent hours discussing our options, from legal recourse to seeking counseling to mend our fractured relationship. In those moments, it felt like we were a team again, facing adversity together as we had done in the past. However, deep down, I couldn't shake the doubt that lingered. Could we truly overcome this betrayal? Could our marriage be repaired after such a breach of trust? The fear and uncertainty gnawed at me, and I couldn't help but wonder if we were simply postponing the inevitable. As days turned into weeks, and Mark began to engage in difficult conversations with his mother, there was a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to salvage our relationship and recover the lost savings. But little did I know that the road ahead would be fraught with even greater challenges, pushing us to our limits and testing the strength of our love in ways we had never imagined. Weeks turned into a blur of emotional turmoil and tense conversations with Mark. Despite our efforts to find a solution to the devastating situation he had plunged us into, a dark cloud of uncertainty continued to hover over our lives. One evening, Mark called me into the living room, his face etched with worry. "Honey, my mother and I have come to a decision," he said, his voice filled with apprehension. "We're going abroad. We need to sort out the situation with the money. She's convinced it's just a matter of time before we can withdraw it from the bank." My heart sank as I processed his words. The idea of Mark leaving me behind while he and his mother embarked on this perilous journey overseas was both shocking and unsettling. I felt a wave of abandonment wash over me, a sense of being left to deal with the aftermath of their reckless actions on my own. Mark, however, assured me that it was only temporary. "We'll be back soon, my love," he promised, his eyes searching mine for understanding. "I'll make things right, and we can put all of this behind us." Reluctantly, I agreed to his plan, desperate for a resolution to the nightmare that had consumed our lives. I watched as Mark and his mother made preparations for their journey, their sense of determination and resolve offering a glimmer of hope. But deep down, a nagging doubt remained. Could they truly resolve the situation abroad? Would they be able to recover the lost money and return to mend our shattered lives? Or was this decision just another chapter in the tragic tale of betrayal and heartbreak that had engulfed us? As the days passed, the reality of Mark and his mother's departure began to set in. They made their preparations, packing their bags and making arrangements for their journey abroad. With each passing moment, I felt a growing sense of unease and fear, uncertain about what the future held for us. Despite the emotional turmoil and chaos that had consumed our lives, there was a flicker of hope within me. A hope that Mark and his mother would succeed in resolving the situation overseas, that they would recover the money, and we could finally put this nightmare behind us. Mark assured me through occasional phone calls and messages that they were making progress. He spoke of meetings with bank officials, legal consultations, and the belief that a resolution was within reach. I clung to these messages like a lifeline, the hope they offered providing a temporary reprieve from the constant anxiety that had become my constant companion. But hope, as I would soon come to realize, can be a cruel thing. As weeks turned into months, the frequency of Mark's updates began to wane. The messages became less detailed, and the tone shifted from one of determination to one of uncertainty. It was during this time that doubt began to creep back into my mind. The promises of resolution and redemption that Mark had conveyed through those messages began to feel increasingly hollow. It was as if the more time passed, the more elusive our salvation became. I knew deep down that something was amiss, that the situation was far more complex than Mark had initially let on. The darkness of despair threatened to overwhelm me, and I couldn't help but wonder if my belief in a happy ending had been nothing more than wishful thinking. Little did I know that the facade of hope was about to crumble, revealing a harsh and unforgiving reality that would plunge us even deeper into the depths of this harrowing ordeal. As the weeks stretched into months and Mark and his mother remained abroad, the once tenuous hope I had clung to began to erode. The updates I received from Mark grew sparser, and their tone shifted from cautious optimism to one of desperation and uncertainty. I found myself living in a constant state of anxiety, checking my phone obsessively for any word from Mark, any sign that they were making progress in resolving the situation with the money. Each day that passed without news felt like an eternity, and the weight of our precarious situation bore down on me like an unrelenting burden. It became increasingly clear that the road to resolution was far more treacherous than Mark had initially conveyed. The obstacles they faced in trying to withdraw the money from the bank were insurmountable, and the hope of a quick fix began to fade. Mark and his mother struggled to make ends meet in the foreign country they found themselves in. They sold whatever possessions they could spare, living off meager resources as they navigated a landscape of uncertainty and despair. The grim reality of their situation became all too apparent. During our sporadic phone conversations, I could hear the exhaustion and desperation in Mark's voice. He spoke of sleepless nights, endless bureaucracy, and the constant fear of being discovered as foreigners in a foreign land. It was a far cry from the life we had once shared, filled with dreams of a bright future together. Despite the hardship they endured, Mark clung to the belief that they would eventually overcome the obstacles and return home with the money in hand. He promised that our suffering would soon come to an end, that we would rebuild our lives together. But with each passing day, my faith in his assurances dwindled. The weight of our collective mistakes bore down on us, and I couldn't help but wonder if we had crossed a point of no return. A point where the damage done to our relationship and our finances was irreparable. As the dismal reality of their situation abroad continued to unfold, I found myself questioning not only the feasibility of their return, but also the fate of our love, which had been stretched to its limits by the web of deceit, betrayal, and despair that had entangled us. With each passing day, the situation abroad for Mark and his mother grew more dire. The hope that had initially fueled their journey had dwindled, replaced by the harsh reality of their predicament. They had sold whatever possessions they could, including some of our most cherished belongings, to make ends meet. Their funds had run dangerously low, and they were forced to live a hand-to-mouth existence in a foreign land. The once comforting prospect of a resolution to our financial woes had become a distant dream, fading like a mirage in the desert. Mark, who had always been a pillar of strength in our relationship, now sounded defeated and broken during our phone calls. He spoke of the constant struggle to find shelter and food, of facing discrimination and suspicion as foreigners in a land that offered them no refuge. It pained me to hear the despair in his voice, and the guilt I felt for his predicament weighed heavily on my conscience. While he had made a grave mistake by surrendering our savings to his mother, I couldn't help but feel a deep empathy for the suffering he was enduring. In the midst of their hardship, something began to shift in Mark's demeanor. He started to lay blame at my feet, reminding me of the ultimatum his mother had given us back home. He insinuated that I had somehow pushed him into this situation, that it was my fault for not acquiescing to his mother's demands. The threat of divorce, which had been wielded like a weapon from the very beginning, still loomed over us like a dark cloud. Mark would often bring it up during our conversations, using it as leverage to try and make me see things from his perspective. Our once unbreakable love, which had endured countless trials and tribulations, was now fractured and fragile. The strain of our separation, combined with the blame and guilt that festered between us, had left us both feeling helpless and adrift in a sea of uncertainty. As the days turned into weeks, I couldn't help but wonder if our love would be able to withstand the weight of the betrayal and hardship that had befallen us. The road ahead remained shrouded in darkness, with no clear path to salvation in sight. As the harrowing saga of betrayal and despair continued to unfold, my conversations with Mark became increasingly strained. The distance between us, both physically and emotionally, had grown wider with each passing day. Mark's attitude had shifted from one of remorse and regret to a growing resentment. He seemed to hold me partly responsible for the predicament he and his mother now found themselves in. He argued that my unwillingness to comply with his mother's demands had forced his hand, leading to the shocking decision to give away our savings. During our phone calls, He would often remind me of the ultimatum his mother had delivered, using it as a weapon to make me feel guilty and responsible for their suffering abroad. The threat of divorce still hung heavily in the air, like a dark shadow that refused to dissipate. It was a painful and heart-wrenching transformation to witness in the man I had once shared a deep and unwavering love with. The trust that had been the bedrock of our relationship had been shattered, replaced by bitterness and resentment. Mark's mother, too, was a presence that cast a long and malevolent shadow over our lives. Her role in coercing Mark into surrendering our savings was a betrayal in its own right, and the damage she had inflicted upon our marriage was immeasurable. Despite the turmoil and heartache, there was a part of me that desperately clung to the hope that Mark and I could somehow find a way to repair the damage done. We had faced adversity together in the past, and our love had weathered many storms. However, the road to reconciliation appeared increasingly treacherous, and the scars of betrayal ran deep. The promise of a happy future together, once so bright and full of potential, now seemed like a distant and fading dream. As I grappled with the harsh reality of our situation, I couldn't help but wonder if our love would ultimately prove resilient enough to withstand the trials and tribulations that had befallen us. The uncertainty of our future weighed heavily on my heart, and I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with even greater challenges. With each passing day, the weight of our shattered dreams and broken promises grew heavier, like an anchor dragging us deeper into the abyss of uncertainty. The once unbreakable bond that Mark and I had shared had been strained to its limits, and the scars of betrayal ran deep. As the situation abroad continued to deteriorate, Mark and his mother's desperation grew. They struggled to find a way to survive in a foreign land, a place that offered them no solace or support. The money we had entrusted to them had become an elusive mirage, forever out of reach. Mark's calls became less frequent, his voice a haunting echo of the man I had once known. He no longer spoke of hope or resolution, but instead his words were filled with resignation and bitterness. The threat of divorce, which had hung over us like a dark cloud, still lingered, casting a long and ominous shadow over our relationship. I found myself grappling with a profound sense of loss, the loss of our shared dreams, the loss of the trust that had once bound us together, and the loss of the future we had envisioned. It was as if our love had been buried beneath the weight of betrayal, and I wondered if it could ever resurface. The uncertainty of our future was a constant source of anxiety and despair. I couldn't help but question whether our love would prove strong enough to withstand the trials and tribulations that had befallen us. The road ahead seemed fraught with obstacles, and the possibility of reconciliation felt increasingly remote. In moments of solitude, I often found myself reflecting on the choices that had brought us to this point, the decisions made in the heat of desperation, the secrets and lies that had festered, and the betrayal that had torn us apart. I wondered if there was a way to rebuild the trust that had been shattered, to mend the broken pieces of our relationship, and to find a path forward. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the uncertainty of our future remained a haunting specter, leaving me with a deep sense of sorrow and regret. The journey we had embarked upon had led us to a place of darkness and despair, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was any hope left for a happy ending to our story.